You told yourself you would start an hour ago, and somehow you are still here, doing everything except the one thing that matters. I used to think this was a discipline problem, something fixable with a better planner or a stricter morning routine. But the more I watched myself do it, on tasks I genuinely wanted to finish, the less it looked like laziness. It started looking like something hiding underneath, something quieter and far more stubborn than a scheduling issue. He knows the deadline sitting right in front of him. He knows exactly what needs to happen next, step by step. And yet, he reorganizes his desk, answers 3 emails that could easily wait, and calls it getting ready to focus. If procrastination were really about laziness, doing nothing would feel easy and relaxed. But it never quite feels that way, does it? It feels tense and restless, strangely exhausting, like running in place while insisting you have not moved an inch. That tension is the first real clue that something deeper is happening here. A lazy person, in the way we usually picture laziness, feels calm while avoiding work entirely. But the person procrastinating rarely feels calm at all. He feels a low hum of guilt underneath everything he does instead of the real task. He scrolls his phone, but he is not really enjoying the scrolling. He watches something, but half his mind keeps running quiet calculations about how much time he is losing. This is not the behavior of someone who simply does not care about the outcome. It is the behavior of someone who cares so much that caring itself has become unbearable to sit with. And that single contradiction quietly reframes everything we thought we understood about avoidance and delay. Once you notice that tension, you start noticing it everywhere you look. You see it in the friend who has a brilliant idea and never opens the laptop to build it. You see it in yourself, staring at a blank page, typing a sentence, deleting it, typing it again. The task itself is usually not difficult in any physical sense at all. Writing an email is not physically difficult in any real sense. Starting a workout is not physically difficult either, if you think about it honestly. What is difficult is something invisible standing right in front of the task, something that has almost nothing to do with the task itself. If this were only about time management, better calendars would have solved it decades ago. They haven't solved it, despite thousands of productivity apps promising to fix exactly this problem, which means the real problem was never actually about time in the first place. So what is it actually about, underneath all the excuses we tell ourselves? I started paying closer attention to the exact moment procrastination begins, not the hours of avoidance that follow. In that split second, right before avoidance starts, there is almost always a flicker of discomfort.
He opens the document, feels a small spike of unease, and closes it without registering why it happened. That unease is not really about the task sitting in front of him. It is about what completing that task would represent to him personally. Somewhere underneath, a quiet voice keeps asking a much scarier question than any deadline. What if I try and it still is not good enough when I finish? As long as the task stays undone, that particular question never has to be answered honestly. This is where procrastination starts looking less like avoidance of work and more like avoidance of judgment. You can fail at something you never fully attempted, and somehow that feels safer than trying with everything you have. If he never submits the project, he can always tell himself he could have done better given more time. The unfinished task becomes a strange kind of protection, a shield against discovering your best effort was not enough. It's uncomfortable to admit, but many of us would rather live with the guilt of not starting. That guilt feels safer than the grief of trying fully and genuinely falling short. Guilt is painful, but it is familiar and manageable in a way grief rarely is. Once you see this pattern clearly, the little rituals of procrastination start making a strange kind of sense. Cleaning the house before writing feels productive, so it doesn't register as avoidance. Researching a topic for the 5th time instead of starting feels responsible, so it doesn't feel like fear. These behaviors let you stay busy without ever entering the emotionally exposed territory of actually trying your hardest. You get to feel like you are working while quietly protecting yourself from the moment where effort finally meets outcome. Here's the part that stings a little when you sit with it honestly. The more something matters to you personally, the more elaborate these protective rituals tend to become over time. This pattern rarely comes from nowhere, and it usually has a beginning somewhere in the past. Somewhere earlier, effort probably got tied to judgment in a way that never fully loosened its grip on him. Maybe it was a teacher who praised the grade instead of praising the honest attempt behind it. Maybe it was a parent who responded to failure with disappointment instead of curiosity or warmth. He learned quietly, without anyone meaning to teach him this exact lesson, that trying hard and failing felt dangerous. Trying halfway leaves a convenient exit, an excuse waiting patiently in his back pocket. Trying fully and missing anyway leaves absolutely nothing left to hide behind afterward. So his mind, trying its best to protect him, found clever ways to avoid that exposure again. Underneath that protective defense sits something even quieter, something closer to identity than simple performance or achievement. If your sense of worth got wrapped early in being capable, being smart, or having it together, then failure never feels like just a bad outcome. It feels direct evidence against who you've always believed yourself to be underneath everything else. That's a much heavier thing to risk than simply missing a deadline at work. You are not only protecting a project when you delay it repeatedly for weeks, you are protecting a story about yourself that you're not ready to test against reality yet.
Somewhere inside, a quiet part of you has decided that not knowing feels safer than confirming your worst fear. This is exactly why procrastination often shows up strongest on the things that matter most to us. People rarely procrastinate on tasks they genuinely do not care about, because nothing emotional is really at stake there. But the novel you have wanted to write for years carries real emotional weight behind every blank page. The importance itself quietly becomes the obstacle standing between you and the very first sentence. The more meaningful something feels, the more it threatens your sense of self if it goes badly. And the more your mind looks for convincing reasons to keep it just out of reach. It's a strange kind of protection that ends up costing you the very thing you wanted most. Watch how this plays out in something as ordinary as buying a gym membership in January. He signs up with real intention, buys new shoes, and tells his friends he's starting Monday morning. Monday arrives, and suddenly there's a perfectly reasonable excuse why it has to be Tuesday instead. This was never really about fitness or exercise routines or getting stronger physically. It is about the vulnerability of trying and being seen trying, especially if results are slow to appear. As long as he has not fully committed to the process, he has not fully risked anything emotionally. The moment he shows up consistently and still doesn't see the results he imagined, something changes. He loses the comfortable excuse that he simply hadn't tried hard enough yet, and that loss feels frightening. The same quiet pattern hides inside relationships too, not only inside tasks and personal goals. Someone avoids having an important conversation with a partner, not because the right words are hard to find. It's because saying those words out loud finally makes the outcome real and unavoidable. As long as the conversation stays unspoken, both possibilities, connection and rejection, remain technically still open. The moment those words are finally said, one of those two possibilities disappears completely and permanently. Procrastination, seen through this lens, is not really about laziness or poor time management at all. It's about staying in the space right before an outcome, because that space still contains hope. And hope, even fragile hope, often feels safer to hold on to than a definite final answer. There's a physical side to all of this that rarely gets mentioned, something happening below conscious thought entirely. When he opens that document and feels the flicker of unease, his body is not staying neutral during that moment. His nervous system registers the task as a mild threat, the same way it might register a stranger's raised voice. It's not a dramatic threat, nothing close to danger, but it's enough to trigger a small avoidance response. Turning away from the laptop, reaching for the phone instead, briefly relieves that tension in a way that feels immediate and real. The relief is temporary, but the body does not know that in the moment it happens. It only knows that avoidance made the discomfort go away, so it quietly reinforces the exact same pattern. Over time, that pattern stops feeling like a choice at all and starts feeling like instinct. That need to protect hope explains why guilt alone rarely fixes chronic procrastination on its own. You can feel absolutely terrible about avoiding something and still avoid it again the very next day. Guilt simply does not address the deeper fear that is quietly driving the avoidant behavior underneath. Telling someone to just try harder completely ignores the actual mechanism running the show behind the scenes. It's not really a lack of willpower holding him back from starting the project. It's an unconscious calculation insisting that trying and failing costs more than never trying at all. Until that internal calculation genuinely shifts, discipline alone will rarely be enough to fix the pattern. You end up fighting a feeling with nothing but a to-do list, and feelings rarely listen to logic that ignores them completely.
So what actually shifts that quiet, unconscious calculation running underneath everything you do? Sometimes it is realizing your worth was never really tied to the outcome, even though it felt that way. Sometimes it is noticing that people who love you are not measuring your value by your productivity alone. And sometimes it is simply naming the fear directly, out loud or on paper, instead of letting it run silently. Fear that stays unnamed tends to quietly run the entire show without you ever noticing its influence. Fear that finally gets named starts losing some of its grip because it can no longer disguise itself as laziness. It reveals itself honestly as what it actually always was underneath the surface. Social comparison makes this whole pattern quietly worse, especially now, in ways it never used to. He scrolls past someone his age who seems to have already finished the thing he keeps avoiding. That comparison does not motivate him the way it might seem it should from the outside. Instead, it raises the emotional stakes even higher, making the eventual attempt feel even more exposed and risky. If everyone else appears to be succeeding effortlessly, his own struggle starts to feel like a private, personal failure. So the avoidance deepens, not because he cares less about the outcome, but because he cares even more. Busyness becomes a convenient performance in this environment, a way of looking productive without ever actually being tested. He can point to a full calendar and feel useful, even while the one meaningful task sits completely untouched. It is easier to be busy with everything else than to be still with the one thing that actually matters. There is something almost tender in finally recognizing this exact pattern within yourself without immediately reaching for judgment. It means you were never broken or undisciplined in the way you secretly feared all along. It means some younger version of you learned, in a moment that probably felt small at the time, an important lesson. Trying fully was dangerous, and that particular lesson never quite got updated as you grew older. The task sitting in front of you today is not really the thing you're avoiding at all. You're avoiding the feeling that task might bring up, the possibility that your best effort might fall short. And that possibility touches something much older and more tender than the actual deadline itself ever could. All of it, the cleaning instead of writing, the research instead of finally starting, the sudden urgency of unrelated tasks, points back to the same quiet protection. It was never really laziness, and it was never really poor time management either, whatever it looked like from outside. It was a mind trying its best to keep you safe from a feeling it once decided was too dangerous to face directly. Every delayed task, every reorganized desk, every quiet promise of starting tomorrow was never really about the task itself. It was about protecting a fragile story, guarding a sense of worth, and staying just far enough from the outcome. Far enough that hope could still survive a little longer inside that comfortable, familiar distance. Maybe that's worth sitting with for a moment, not to judge yourself harshly, but simply to notice honestly. The next time you catch yourself avoiding something that genuinely matters to you, you might gently ask what you're protecting. And you might also ask what you are really afraid the outcome would say about who you are. You don't have to answer that question right away, and you probably won't want to. Sometimes just asking the question honestly is enough to loosen its grip a little at a time. And maybe that's exactly where the next conversation naturally begins, because a new question quietly appears afterward. How do you actually learn to feel safe trying anyway, even when the outcome stays uncertain and unwritten? Thank you for spending this time thinking it through together, slowly and honestly, without rushing toward easy answers. If this helped you see your own patterns a little more clearly, or someone you care about, it would genuinely mean something. A quick like on your way out would help more than you know. I would love to know, honestly, what is one thing you have been quietly putting off for a while now? And what do you think you might actually be protecting by not starting it just yet? If quiet, reflective conversations like this one are something you enjoy, even the uncomfortable ones, consider subscribing. We can keep exploring these patterns together, one honest conversation at a time.